Taxation in New Zealand may be seen as a means to improve equality of wealth amongst its citizens, perhaps a Robin Hood of some sorts to right-wing advocates, but its primary goal is to generate revenue to be spent towards the running of the government. For an executive of the government branch, there are a variety of aspects to consider outside of just the financial context when it comes to taxation and appropriation planning. Taxation is a subject that a nation's citizen, most of them being taxpayers, perhaps takes the most interest to when it comes to public affairs. Taxpayers are quite sensitive to the way tax money is handled, so tax policies could directly influence the public's behaviour. This could be used by the government to encourage desirable social outcomes or prohibit undesirable ones. The collection and spending of taxes can very easily win or lose voters, so there may be a political agenda involved with tax planning. It would seem that the cabinet ministers would have nearly undisputable decision-making powers over their respective branches at the end of the day. However, after being exposed to information on various government branches, the executive officers and top-end managers appear to not have much control over the specifics of the budgets and appropriation planning. Contrary to my earlier belief, they may have influence over what general management approach the branch takes, but they will not often interfere with the budgeting process itself, involving estimating the branch's expenditure needs. And because only Parliament technically has the power to approve tax collection and provide financial backing to the government, they must keep tax compliance high while managing Crown revenue efficiently. This, all in all, requires a balancing act of going between meeting the needs of the executive branches and the needs of the public, all the while achieving social objectives. The government should strive to fulfill the executive branch's operational and contingent financial requirements, but must do so in a sustainable way that burdens the taxpayers no more than what is absolutely necessary. One point of criticism is for the vagueness in appropriation of funds. There are some questions I raise about transparency. What are these fairly big chunks of non-specified generic expenditure items in the budget? And if they are consolidated accounts just for the sake of materiality in financial reporting, can materiality really be maintained without destroying too much accountability? Accountability and chains of responsibility in a public organization could be seen as a performance assurance from the executives, while at the same time serve as a mechanism to ensure things simply get done. Depending on the establishment, accountability may be stated as a performance or ethical guideline, or it could act as a boundary of jurisdictions for each manager's area of responsibility. It is worth noting that the word accountability and responsibility just doesn't carry the same level of tangibility as financial performance or tax appropriation. However, it is nonetheless a crucial part of efficient running of any organization. To me, the most logical and obvious way of looking at accountability was that everyone simply wants to keep their jobs at the end of the day. I had always believed, and still do think to some extent, that the responsibility and accountability of an individual is primarily advocated by his or her motivation to not become redundant. And as former NBA player Jalen Rose frequently likes to put it, don't get fired and keep getting them checks. But this is not truly the case, because a dismissal of a public servant on grounds that they lack accountability and responsibility is very uncommon in actuality. There is a huge amount of pressure from the Parliament and the general public put onto the executives to display transparency at all times. Due to the nature of how they source their funds for the operations, these executives have to be answerable to a significantly wider range of stakeholders than most private organization executives. And speaking to classmates, I found it interesting how the name Hikia Parata and Judith Collins frequently popped up as examples of a breach in accountability in the New Zealand government. And it seemed to me that most people were associating scandals involving misuse of taxpayer money with the executive branch's operational accountability. But this is often put on a spotlight and blown out of proportion, which is generally a result of political mudslinging rather than inefficiencies. New Zealand government is currently perceived by its citizens to be one of the best in the world when it comes to transparency, and I'm beginning to see that the aforementioned events were incidental issues. For the most part, ministerial departments appear to be functioning very well in New Zealand. Speaking from experiences while researching the MPI biosecurity for the previous assessment, the highly technical information regarding various departments' operations was quite challenging to understand and analyze for me. An ordinary concerned member of the public may struggle to link the government budget expenditures to the tax they've actually paid, especially if they're not used to dealing with the high volume and complexity of information that are produced by the executive branches. This could possibly be a reason why the general public scrutinizes the government budget as they do, and views tax-funded activities in a somewhat negative light. Conversely, this mistrust or suspicion by the public could be beneficial as it keeps executives and managers in the public sector on their toes at all times. Financial management and performance planning aims to achieve a quantitative method of accounting, and it is widely believed to be imperative for the efficient allocation of resources within the government branch and evaluation of performance by different levels of management. And additionally, it allows for future planning and preparing for contingencies based on historical performances. Financial performance measurements are also important in applying accountability to individuals' performances, as they provide an objective standard for stakeholders to critique budgets and the subsequent outcome from the budget. However, they can lead to myopic thinking by overlooking intrinsic values in favor of scientific and numerical data. And subsequently, reliance on such information might lead to dishonest managers and executives being undeservingly recognized as being accountable for simply meeting their goals set on paper. As an example, in Pakistan, local government officials sent fake data on immunization projects to the central government while misusing funds from the health board for their own interests. And for a while, the central government was misled to think that they were achieving satisfactory healthcare objectives, when in truth, vaccination was only carried out around 16% area of the outbreak province. So despite the risk of deceptions like this, accountability can be forced through audits ordered by the Parliament in New Zealand. Because the high level of transparency in the New Zealand government, its expenditures from activities are well accounted for, and so financial reports validate the calculation of taxation and appropriation planning without too much anxiety for corruption. Initially, I had difficulties distinguishing between the appropriation planning and financial accounting, Now I view taxation and appropriation in a rather future-oriented forecasting type activity, whereas financial and performance accounting appears to be more of a historical reflection of something that appropriation planning is based around.